Welcome to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein, talking about the evolutionary, the revolutionary, the inspiration and the perspiration, and those aha moments that change everything. And now here's your host, Rich Goldstein.
Rich Goldstein here, host of the Innovations and Breakthroughs podcast, where I feature top leaders and the path they took to create change. Past guests include Joe Polish, Roland Frazier, and Mitch Russo. This episode is brought to you by my company, Goldstein Patent Law, where we help you to protect your ideas and products. We've advised and obtained patents for thousands of companies over the past 28 years. So if you're a company that has software, a product, or a design you want protected, go to goldsteinpatentlaw.com, where there are amazing free resources for learning about the patent process. And you could email my team at welcome@goldsteinpc.com to explore if it's a match to work together. You could also check out the book I wrote for the American Bar Association that explains in plain English how patents work. It's called the ABA Consumer Guide to Obtaining a Patent. I have with me here today Josh Johnston. Josh was the chief operating officer for an agency that he helped grow to 7 figures. After he exited in 2020, he launched Hydra, which is a consultancy that allows him to consult with agencies around the world, digital marketing agencies that work on things like Facebook ads, TikTok, essentially anything digital marketing related. He just hosted his first event back in August. And he's getting ready to host another event this coming spring. And it's my pleasure to welcome here today, Josh Johnston. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, Rich. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. So yeah, let's talk about that. So kind of what did it take, first of all, to get that agency from zero, or where you found it, to 7 figures?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we started the agency, it was actually founded by the CEO, and he ran it solo actually for the first year. So a lot of people actually with our growth don't really realize that, the first year it was solo operated. And so they thought like we just had this massive blow up. But, for us, it was one of those things where it was actually a slower growth than most people thought. Right. And so I came on in that second year, at the beginning of that second year of the agency's life cycle. And, for us, the growth trajectory really came from a lot of the relationships that we built with other brand owners, with other agency owners, that allowed us to really get into the right rooms and be able to cultivate strong relationships with large brands. And so for us, at the beginning, it was slow. We didn't have like a very quick, like a lot of quick wins. We were still trying to find our niche, which was the direct-to-consumer e-commerce space. And for us, it took some time before we actually got to a point of knowing exactly who we served, the specific avatar, to the type of clients that we wanted to land, to the retainers that we wanted, within our agency. But all of a sudden, we started landing a little bit larger brands through relationships, not because of any crazy marketing strategy that we were running internally. It was strictly, hey, we're going to build the right relationships. We're going to attend masterminds, events, places where we know that our ideal clientele kind of lives, and we're going to start fostering relationships with these people. And so that was our essentially how we got started. And through that, we were able to build it to a multi-7-figure agency roughly 18 months after I came on board, and fostered a team of about 25 people, leaning in on services such as content creation, paid media, and social media management as well. So that was kind of the life cycle of it. And yeah, it was crazy when we did start scaling, because it was almost like a snap of a finger of like all of this crazy growth happening all at once. But like it was a slow burn up to it. But once the rocket kind of caught fire, it was off to the races.
Awesome. And what was it like, though, jumping in on the second year then? People already have their habits, they have their systems,
Sure.
Sometimes pretty half-ass systems, right? But they are there, and like you're jumping in, and you're probably seeing some things that need to shift. Some blind spots that people had about how to set things up, and so kind of what was that like jumping in?
Yeah, it's funny because there weren't any systems coming into it, right? Like it was my best friend started the agency, and he was like, "Hey, I need a COO to come help me build this thing." And I was like, "I don't even know what a COO is, but that sounds cool, and I'm in." And so when we jumped in, I didn't even know anything about the position. I came in and I was running social media accounts. I was running some paid ads here and there. I was a glorified social media manager with the COO title, right? I was doing a lot of the fulfillment when I first started, and so, but I think it gave me the necessary tools to help build appropriate systems and build out the appropriate process for each department to have success across every department that we were running, right? So it was the very beginning. There was no glamour in it. It was very in the trenches, very in the weeds, having to learn each position extremely well so we could pass off some of those fulfillment tasks to other employees, right? So like at the beginning there was nothing. There was no infrastructure. So it was learning as we went. And like I had to learn to become a COO because there's not really handbooks on it,
Right.
So I had to learn from other people. I had to self-teach myself and just kind of figure it out.
Awesome. Yeah. And so that's great though. I love it. Like you didn't even know what a COO was. But it was just kind of like, hey, I'm doing this thing. I've got this thing and it's kind of cool. And like, I need your help. And so, really it's like he had already established the vision of what it was, right?
Yep,
Kind of that
exactly.
CEO stuff. And he's like, I need help to move it further, to grow it, which is like COO stuff.
Yep.
And so and together, that's what you guys did. You jumped in and you helped create systems and I guess grew a team and then moved it towards exit.
Yeah, 100%. And honestly, we wouldn't have been able to move it towards an exit if we didn't build out the appropriate systems. If we didn't have cash flow in the right position. So it was very fortunate that we kind of built the way we did because we did position ourselves for an exit relatively quickly. Within the 2 years that we were operating.
So what were some of the things that you think were crucial towards that growth? Like some of the things that that you created, systems you created that kind of helped you move that quickly from just you and him to exit?
Yeah, for us, something that we kind of adopted very early on is kind of like the what you see a lot in California is like this pod structure of growing a business, right? And so that's something that we adopted probably in our second year of business was our ability to recreate a certain amount of fulfillment tasks across a certain amount of people, right? And what I mean by that is, let's take a creative, for example, of, we would need specific people to do certain tasks within our creative fulfillment, right? So maybe that's pre-production. So the ability to write out scripts, storyboard, onboard a new client, right? There's a lot of things that need to happen in the pre-production side in order to do that. We need probably like a client success manager, account manager, maybe a head of production to come in there and start doing some of those things, right? Well, we also need to actually do the production itself, right? So once we're done with pre-production, we have to do production. Okay, so we actually have to shoot the content and make sure that the models show up, make sure the models are scheduled in, which is kind of pre-production, but make sure that they show up, make sure everything is in alignment with that storyboard. And then after that, we have a post-production team, right? And that post-production team takes that content that we shot in production, edits it, puts the final spins on it, any last revisions that the client might have, and then it gets delivered to that client. Well, there's 4 or 5 positions within each step of that process, right? And so what we kind of realized was we were managing clients, all of our clients, as like a checklist of like top down, where we had, say 45 different clients, all on one list. Well, what we started doing is sectioning that list out, right? So we would have, say 3 pods of 20 different clients being managed in different groups. So it's almost like a team structure where they have one team, they manage 20 clients, and they don't worry about the other 40 clients that we're currently managing. It's just the 20 clients inside of that pod that they're managing, right? So it allowed us to chop things up, apply KPIs to those specific pods that we were managing, and saying, hey, like this pod's exceeding, this pod's not exceeding. And what that did is it allowed us, one, to systemize our process, but it also made things extremely visible from a standpoint of scale, right? So we were able to say, okay, we know that one pod can have X amount of capacity. right? So can handle 20 clients. Now, as we started to inch closer to 15, 16, 17 clients, cool. We'd look at bringing on a second pod to help disperse some of that fulfillment work that we needed in order to scale to our next pod, right? And so we would start stacking those on top of each other, and that allowed us to, one, systemize everything, but two, be able to say, hey, like this is when we need to bring on our next group of production specialists, post-production specialists, copywriters, right? And bring them into the mix with our team, right? And so it allowed us to be able to look at it from a revenue standpoint too, and say, hey, we know that this pod can generate X amount of revenue. We know we'll get this much profit from them. And so this is a good time for us to expand into a new pod. So that's kind of the stance we took on it.
Cool. And it makes perfect sense now that like then the next phase after this agency was then you started consulting with other agencies to show them how to grow.
Exactly. Yep. So now we work with agencies all over the world, teaching them how to grow their operational infrastructure. A lot of them will scale into some sort of pod structure at some point in time. But from the beginning, they're not necessarily in that pod structure. But yeah, like we help with everything from, hey, when's the right time to hire? Who's the right person to hire? To hey, how do we get more leads through the door for us? How do we convert those leads into sales? And then once we have them as a client, how do we fulfill at a very high level? When we have to bring on teammates, how do we create systems around our current systems that will allow us to fulfill on the same amount of work? Because here's the thing: is like the founder is normally the person doing the fulfillment at the beginning. Well, chances are you need to bring someone on to relieve you of some of those things, right? So we need to have good systems in place to make sure that the quality of work stays at a high level. And so those are all things that we help with within our consultancy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, though. Probably one of the biggest challenges that agencies face is growing and scaling. It's like you start out with someone who's really good at digital marketing, someone who's got an instinct for like what needs to be done for a client, and they probably generate great results for a handful of clients. And then they say, well, I if I'm going to grow, I need some help. And then how do I grow? And then how do I duplicate myself and my eye toward what needs to be done? And obviously, can't be sitting there editing videos and writing copy for every client. So have to find ways to delegate, right?
Yep.
Even with an initial team. And then ways to not be the only one selling the services, not be the only one bringing in new clients. And then ultimately that like means like other teams, and it's like it's just a huge task. You see so many agencies do great when it's just one guy or even when it's a small team, but then it just gets watered down and diluted.
Sure.
And so it sounds like you help people to tackle that among other things.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And one of the big things that we see on the agency side is when agencies start to scale up, they always feel, hey, I need to delegate things off my plate, which is 100% sure you need to delegate those things. But you have to still have the leadership with that group of people that you're delegating to. A lot of times founders think, I'm going to pass this off and we're good, right? And the training stops there. It's like, no, you have to continue to work with that team. And that's the biggest disconnect we see from people going from, say, like a 3 to 4 person team,
right, into
like a 10-person team, right? Is that there's no, the pass off is like, the assumption is made that there's leadership and training continuing to happen, right? And that's the biggest disconnect for us. And that's what we need to tie back into scaling from a 3 to 4 person team to a 10-person team, is that ability to still lead the team, to still be on the front lines with them, get them trained, and then create more leaders within your organization. And when you can create more leaders within your organization, that's when you can really lay on the gas and be able to scale into a 30, 40, 50-person team, because now you have a leadership structure underneath you that thinks like you, that does fulfillment the same way that you would, right? But if you're not developing your leaders inside your organization to do the same things that you would do as a founder, you'll never get to that large team.
Yeah. And so how do you develop leaders? I mean, like there's the day-to-day developing leaders, giving people opportunities to step into the leadership. But like, do you believe in like kind of formal leadership training, or like sending your team to through some type of program, or
Yeah.
what do you see as like the real path toward developing leaders?
Yeah, great question. It's a combination of all those things. Yes, 100%. Like we buy programs all the time. We buy masterminds. We buy coaching programs. Like it's something that we invest very heavily in on our side. But it's also from a standpoint of even having internal trainings with the team. And for for us, it's like our CEO has a knowledge of information that he needs to share with the team, right? Can't just hold that to himself and expect the team to learn all of it by themselves, right? So there's a lot that we have learned as CEOs, as founders of business, that we need to pass on to our team, and a lot of those things can't be taught through a program. Like a lot of those learnings need to happen from internal trainings, right? And that's the thing, is like we have a very growth minded type culture where it's like, hey, like we read and we're going to be tackling books together, and these are things that we're going to do to get better at our craft, and that's just the culture that we're developing inside of our consultancy. It's what we had inside of our agency. So it's like these are the things that we have to do on a regular basis. Otherwise, people get stagnant, and the growth tends to stop, and they get complacent within their position, and that they'll either stay where they're at and not grow past it and not have an opportunity for leadership, whether they know it or not, or they end up leaving because they feel stuck and they'll move somewhere else that has a better culture that gives them more opportunity and where they feel like they're being challenged.
Cool. Yeah. And speaking of kind of like, well, leadership is about people, right? It's about people, and it's about relationships, and like, so you said a big part of the growth of your agency was through relationships, through events, and through meeting people.
Yep.
So kind of tell me about that, and like in the way in which you created an event recently, this past summer, and kind of like what was the value to your team in doing that?
Yeah, for us, I wanted to host an event that allowed people to come into a room where they could have intimate conversations, still have good curriculum and still have good like keynote speakers. But the whole idea was if you're in search of getting connected with someone that you need to be connected with, like this is the spot you need to be. And so for us, like the event was about 50 people, so relatively small room. We weren't trying to host a 1,000-person event. The idea of it was that it was supposed to be intimate, and it was supposed to be a place where you go deep in conversation with your peers in the same industry, and you learn a lot about the tactics that they're utilizing, whether that is lead generation tactics, how they're leading their team, fulfillment, whatever it is, right? You go deep with those conversations. You come in there almost with an agenda of like, this is what I'm looking for, right? And that someone in that room is going to have the answer to the problem that you're currently having. And so that was kind of the idea, because so many times, we go to events, and for me, someone that's relatively introverted, sometimes it's hard to put yourself out there and have an agenda coming into an event, where you don't just like sit on the wall or sit in the back of the room and do your own thing, right? And so we tried to foster a room that allowed people to get what they came for, and then hopefully leave with new partnerships, because some of our best partnerships in the agency space came from other agencies that didn't have specific services that we delivered, right? And so for us, it was content creation. It is very difficult to have a content studio in-house, have a content team that can pump out a high volume of content. And so for us in 2018, that was one of our selling propositions, is like we can create volume at scale, and we can even do it for agencies. And so for us, we partnered with certain agencies that introduced us to some of the biggest e-commerce brands in the world. And so that's how we kind of got our start in the space. And it all came from a relationship built in a room similar to one that we were trying to foster with our event, right? And so that's kind of the idea of us hosting events, is bringing people in that can build relationships like that, where they can all make money together.
Yeah, and so it sounds like the attendees were all agency owners, and you did some masterminding where people got to share what they're going through, and got to learn from other people who might have been there last year, or which sounds awesome. And what was the name of the event?
Yeah, it's called the Hydra Council.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just our business name, and then just council at the end. So
cool. And so what did you learn from that event that you kind of is going to shape the next one that you do?
Yeah, a lot of takeaways, man. It was our first event ever. So coming into it, of course we have a high expectation for how the event ran. But for us, like, we weren't 100% sure how it would turn out. But I guess like takeaways for us, I guess essentially like there's nothing that really went wrong, right? I would say like a few like minor things that we could have cleaned up on our end was probably just a few less seats. So we kind of found that a lot of people gravitated towards the back, and like we had like some couches in there and stuff too. And like people like went for like the comfy seats. So putting like the comfy seats up front, if you're hosting an event, put the comfy seats up front, and have less chairs than you think are available. And if you need to add more chairs, then you can. I think we had like 75 chairs set up in that room. And so it made it kind of feel a little bit more empty than it actually was, because people were kind of spread out a little bit because the room was a decent size. But if you want the atmosphere to feel full, take away chairs, have less, and then add more in as needed.
I go to a mastermind where they start with a limited number of tables and chairs, and they literally, like, as they fill up, they add a table with a few more chairs. Add a table. So
super smart. Yeah.
Like they've got people that are like literally standing in the back of the room waiting to add tables and chairs as people come in.
Yeah.
And so they keep it tight like that.
That's right. Yeah,
keep
exactly.
People engaged.
Exactly. And that was the idea, is like we want to keep people engaged. So the second day we actually removed a lot of the chairs in there and gave people less of an option to sit other places. So and then I guess the second one would be the second one was sponsorships. So apparently a lot of people sponsor events. And so I guess sponsors are supposed to cover your hard costs of throwing an event. So if you ever throw an event, get some sponsors. People have plenty of money for sponsorships. And so for us, we already have people lined up for our next event to sponsor it. So which is pretty exciting. That'll cover most of our hard costs. And then they'll have a sponsorship slot for our event. So those are like the two big takeaways. I would say like those are the two things we did wrong, when it came to our event. But outside of that, man, like our speakers were great. They were well vetted, made sure that, everyone had the presentations in on time. That way we could look through everything. And then the other thing is just make sure that, the topics really align with who your audience is. I've been to quite a few events where they've had a few talks that was like, okay, like this isn't really speaking to the room. So that'd be the other thing. If you're ever hosting an event, make sure that the topics really speak to the room, vet your people well. Because obviously that person is a representation of you and your company if you're hosting that event. So.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. And so then you're planning to do another one coming up this spring.
Yep, this spring, planning on doing another one. We just rebuilt our regular website, but we're looking at tacking in the Hydra Council side of things into our website as well. So if you're an agency owner and you're interested in coming, just be on the lookout. We'll be having announcements on dates probably sometime during this winter.
I imagine the people that sign up for your newsletter on your website probably will get to hear about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. 100%. Yeah. So it'll definitely be part of the newsletter. We try to be very value forward in our newsletter, but at the end of the day, it's like, hey, like if we're hosting an event, we'd love for you to be there. It's a great room to be in. So.
Absolutely. And so if people want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, how do they go about doing so?
Yeah, so you can find us at workwithhydra.com. That's our website. And you can connect with me on social media. I'm most active on Instagram. And my tag is at Joshi Kobayashi, JOSHYKOBYASHI. It's kind of a mouthful, but that's another. It's another story for another day.
Right. Sounds good. Well, Josh, I appreciate you taking the time to be on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at innovationsandbreakthroughs.com, and we'll see you next time.